So we see by biblical example and precedent that helping the poor was something that early Christians did. And even Cornelius was the first Gentile convert. Wasn't part of the church, wasn't even part of God's old covenant. But he pleased God. And in fact, in Acts chapter 10, verse 4, it makes known that Cornelius' prayers and gifts to the poor was a memorial offering to God. God was pleased with Cornelius, even though he wasn't a Jew, even though he wasn't a Christian. He wasn't in any sort of covenant relationship with God, but he was pleased that he helped the poor. And you know what? I think it's that because of that kind of heart for God and the worship for God and this understanding of valuing people that God was pleased and sent Peter to him so that he could have the message of salvation. I think about that. Do we help the poor? And you know what? In America, sometimes our standards of poor is a little bit skewed because everyone here is a little bit more better off. But even those who are less fortunate, do you think about those single mothers? Do you think about some of those poor kids? Do you think about the homeless? Or even more so, do you think even also about the people in other countries? I mean, we have the luxury of running water. One of the guys who I knew, he was a colonel in the military during the time of Vietnam, and he said, I didn't realize how blessed we were just to have cubed ice. Because in Vietnam, they didn't even know what cubed ice was. And he's like, I've taken for granted all the things God has blessed me with. That was one of his experiences, and I think, you know what, that's another thing. Or what about other places? We see helping not only the poor, we see about helping widows and things like that. And I won't get into that one, but what about helping children? You know, a lot of you actually help support children in various ways through your charity. Some of you guys have done foster care. Some of you guys help raise family members and so forth. But one of the things that I've realized is, you know what, God keeps on telling us throughout the Old Testament and New Testament that he's a defender of the fatherless. And in fact, in James chapter 1, verse 27, it says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. The word religion means paying homage and worship to God. So if we're trying to pay homage and worship to God, what kind of worship does he want? He wants the kind that takes care of children. Because they're so weak and defenseless. That's one of the reasons why I went into, my wife and I do foster care, but I was talking with some of the foster care workers, and they're really struggling right now. They support Grant and Adams County, and we actually have one of the highest per capita foster care to population problems in the state of Washington. And they expect, like I said before, and if you guys have heard, foster care, they expect foster kid problem to double in just a couple of years. Not just 20%, double. Because the economy, because of the growth of methamphetamines, because of the growth of fatherless homes. And it's really striking my heart. And in Grant and Adams County, we have 100 people certified to service all of those counties, 100 families. And out of those families, only 60 families are actually active in wanting to provide service. That's why my wife and I get calls all the time. That's why the Johnsons got calls all the time when they were doing it. And God, and I follow, Tanya and Randy actually helped give me and Disney the courage and the example to actually follow in their footsteps. And I appreciate them for their faith. But I just think about that and think, here are some of the hardest kids. And the latest kid that we have we're watching him for 2.5 weeks, and he's one of the most difficult babies I've ever experienced in my life. But you know what? God loves that child. And I think, we have all these problems. One of the things that we also learned is there was a lawsuit in the state of Washington called the Brahms lawsuit, which said that our social workers can't have any more than 18 kids on their caseload for each social worker, because social workers would neglect the kids because there's just too many on their case. And even though that they had a lawsuit in Grant and Adams County, our social workers average over 30 kids on their caseload. So we're breaking the law. One of the things that also broke my heart was the fact in national statistics, and when it comes to homelessness, the highest demographic to homelessness is former veterans. Our veterans, people who defended our country. But the second highest demographic are children. Veterans and children make up the highest demographics of homelessness in the United States, and we don't like to think about that. We don't want to talk about it, but those two demographics outweigh the demographics of any other groups by large margins. Did you know how adoption and taking kids actually came into existence? It started with Christians. Romans actually would take their sick or their female children, and they would leave them on the hills to be eaten by animals because they weren't worthy to be taken care of. And it was actually the Christians that would go to these hills and bring these children home and take care of them. So it's actually in our own DNA to actually take care of children. And it's because Christians understand that God is the God of the fatherless. I think about all those kids that I worked with in Yakima that Disney and I helped with. Most of those kids came from fatherless homes, and I even look at some of their Facebook pages nowadays, and I see so much of their emotional pain and struggle, and I say, I wish so much I could do something. One of the problems that actually arose up in my mind a little bit more, and I've actually been more aware of it, is Walt actually brought me to open my eyes to see the problem of single parents, and even just our own backyard in Grant County. It's huge. And I think, I don't know how I would be as a single parent. If it wasn't for my wife, it would be hard.
Yeah.
And some of you have been single